ghost investigation tonight, taking these electric scooters in downtown Washington, D.C. These things are awesome.
Lafayette Park is because it's named after the Marquis de Lafayette. He was known as the hero of two worlds because he fought in both the American Revolution and the French Revolution. In the American Revolution, he was on our side, and so they ultimately commemorated him by naming the park after him. It wasn't until way after his death, though. They renamed the park in 1924. Prior to 1924, this was called President's Park, obviously because of the proximity to the White House. You can see it there through the trees, it's all lit up back there. You'll get a much better view of it when we actually get to the White House stop. It's one of the stops on the tour. So from about 1800, when the White House was finished, to 1924, this was President's Park. Prior to 1800 though, before DC was the big fancy capital of the country, it was just a city on the East Coast. And the oldest part of town is off in Georgetown. It's off that way. If you visited Georgetown, you can tell it's a little bit older. It's not nearly as built up as this. It's also kind of crammed together over there. It just feels older. And so this was really the outskirts of that oldest part of town. And none of this stuff was here. The White House wasn't here yet. None of these big fancy buildings, none of it. Way back in the day, there used to be a horse racetrack that sat pretty much on where the park grounds currently are right now. And it attracted a clientele that liked to drink and gamble. Well, you put those things together, you get some reported fights, but also some reported deaths. So some of the earliest ghosts that we think roam the park grounds here are from the racetrack days. If you happen to see one, you usually see a male figure, sort of tattered clothing, shuffling around in the park grounds. There's a chance though that you may not see something, you would smell something. If you are walking and you smell a strong whiff of alcohol, that is an indicator of a ghost from the racetrack days somewhere in the vicinity. The way they interact with us, if you happen to see one and by chance make eye contact with one, there is a good chance that they will run up to you fairly aggressively and they're gonna try to lunge for your pockets or your bags. The idea is they're trying to steal from you, pickpocket you to continue gambling for what they know to be on the park grounds here, that course racetrack. So these are some of the oldest ghosts that we think are still here in Lafayette Park, ghosts from the racetrack days. One of the more famous ghosts though involves this man. His name is Philip Barton Key. And in 1858, Philip Barton Key was quite the catch here in Washington, D.C. He was recently widowed. He was a very successful lawyer, and he had a famous last name. It was Key, K-E-Y. Any guesses as to who his dad was?
Francis Scott Key?
Francis Scott Key, yes, I hear it out there. So that was his dad, the man who wrote the Star Spangled Banner, the national anthem. So 1858, quite the catch. He starts dating this woman here in town. Her name is Teresa Sickles. They really hit it off, everything's going great. The one problem is that Teresa Sickles is already married to another man. And in true DC fashion, he happens to be a state senator for the state of New York. His name is Dan Sickles. When he finds out his wife is cheating on him, obviously he's not very happy about it. But also a known fact here in town is that Dan Sickles himself likes to cheat on his wife. He's just not happy when his wife does it to him. So what he does, he forces her to write a confession about her infidelity, and he publishes it in the newspaper here in DC. It ruins her reputation and it ruins the relationship she had with Philip Barton Key. Well, fast forward next year, 1859 in February, Dan Sickles is walking through the park here. He actually lived in a row home on the far side of the park. When he's walking through the park, he happens to run into Philip Barton Key, the man who basically ruined his marriage. And still harboring a lot of anger and resentment, he pulls out a gun and he shoots him dead on the spot, right here in the park grounds, broad daylight, witnesses and everything. And Key dies from the gunshot wounds here on the park grounds. Dan Sickles is arrested for the crime. He goes to trial, but he's found not guilty. He's the first man in US history to successfully use the temporary insanity plea. So he got off the hook. He never served any time for murdering Key right here in the park. Well, reports of Key's ghost start popping up soon after. People said when the not guilty verdict was being read inside the courthouse, out on the front steps, Philip Barton Key's spirit was seen standing there, shaking his fists up in the air, angered at the fact that his killer got off the hook, never served any time for murdering him. Key is also one of the most frequently cited ghosts here in Lafayette Park. There are more than 1,000 first-hand accounts of him walking around here. The way he interacts with us is a little bit different based on your gender. If you're a female, he's known to be much more, well, he's known to walk up close behind you. You could hear footsteps following you. You may even feel like a slight brush on your shoulder or your cheek. It'll be very subtle, very gentle. If you're a male, he's known to be much more aggressive. You could be walking and actually feel your shoulder get jerked or whipped back. People think he's out here looking for Dan Sickles to try to redo that sort of one-sided fight that ended in his untimely death right here in the park grounds. So Philip Barton Key, one of the more famous and notorious ghosts here in Lafayette Park. Again, when we get to the White House stop, you'll get a much better view of the park itself. We'll actually walk along it. There'll be a great photo op. I know you can't see it super well from right here, but you will get a chance to see it. This is where we're gonna go on a walk now. So we're gonna walk up to 8th Street, which is a block away. We are gonna cross the road and then take a left and go one more block to our next stop. So just follow me up this way. Congregate along the sidewalk right here so we're not blocking this, but look back at that building because that is our next stop there, okay? Our next stop is this house on the corner right behind me here. This is the Dolly Madison house, obviously named after Dolly Madison, the former First Lady and the wife of James Madison, one of the early presidents here in America. I will say I have not seen the lights on in quite some time, so keep an eye out for them. I have something to tell you at the very end about lights in this, so see if anything happens with them. But anyway, like I said, the Dolly Madison house. Dolly Madison herself was a very well-liked woman here in Washington, D.C. She's a famous socialite, one of those individuals who could talk to anybody about anything. She was well-versed in a whole range of topics. And so for that reason, people loved having her around. She's also famous for doing one thing in particular. It's kind of her historical claim to fame. Does anybody know what that one thing is or have any guesses?
The guy.
Yes?
Decorative?
She did do some of that, but that's not the one thing she kind of went down in history for. Anybody have a guess?
The American flag, creating...
Not the American flag. I think that was Betsy.
Oh, yeah.
Is she the one who won the White House?
Exactly, yes. So I'll say that again so you can all hear it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this when we get to the White House stop. But in 1814, during the War of 1812, the British came to town and burned a lot of very important buildings, including the White House. And she was First Lady when that happened, and she had the bright idea that maybe we should try to save some things in the White House. And so one of the more famous things she's credited with saving is this full-length portrait of George Washington that she took down off the wall, threw in the wagon before they evacuated town here. You can see the original, not at the moment because the museum's closed, but if you do come back, the American Art Museum down in Chinatown has this painting, the one that she did save and take down off the wall. So that's kind of what she went down into history for. Anyway, in 1836, her husband passes away, and she moves into the house on the corner here, and she lives in it till 1849, when she herself passes away from old age, just natural causes. When she moves into the house here on the corner, she sends her oldest son to go work the family farm. It was her way of maintaining an income now that she was both widowed and retired, but she didn't make the best choice because her oldest son was quite the drunk, and he ended up bankrupting the family farm, which then kind of put a little wrench in her retirement plans, because this is where a lot of her money was coming from, her income. Going back to what I said, though, about how well-liked of a woman she was and how well-connected she was here in Washington, D.C. People knew her situation. They knew that she was recently widowed. They knew that her son screwed up the farm. So a lot of them would come by and visit her here at her home on a fairly regular basis. And it said that when they'd leave behind money for her so that she could still get by and not have to worry about anything too significantly. The legend is there used to be kind of like a mailbox on the corner here. And people, when they leave, they just slip some money into the box. And then under the guise of night, where she wouldn't be seen, she'd go out into the box, collect the money, and it was just a way for her to get by and not have to worry too much about anything financial. And it really speaks to the kind of woman she was, how well-liked she was. People in town wanted to take care of her, make sure everything was okay. Well, 1849, she does pass away, again, just from natural causes, but reports of her ghost start popping up soon after. If you remember Philip Barton Key, I talked about him being one of the most frequently sighted ghosts inside the park here. Dolly Madison, also one of the most frequently sighted ghosts. She tends to pop up in 3 very specific places. The first one is on that front porch right there. You can see it hanging off the front of the house. She's seen sometimes walking back and forth, kind of pacing, but more often than not, people who see her on that front porch report her standing there, facing and gazing towards the White House, off in the distance there, just kind of looking off that way. The second place she is seen is actually around this statue in this corner of the park, right across the street from her. It's kind of meandering around, but a lot of times, again, pacing around it. And then the third and final place she's frequently seen is in the Rose Garden of the White House, which is not within any civilian view. It's on the backside, kind of by the Oval Office, so we can't see her back there if she does pop up. Dolly Madison, a little bit different than a lot of the other ghosts I have talked about and I'm going to talk about. People like Philip Barton Key, who were tragically and traumatically gunned down in the park. That's not Dolly Madison's story. She lived a long life, died of natural causes, so we like to think of her more as a bright light on the tour, not so much the doom and gloom as a lot of the other characters I'm going to be talking about. And she's haunting a place that she's familiar with. Being a former First Lady over there in the White House, retiring and passing away in the house on the corner here, this is where she wants to stick around and haunt. A common question I get asked is, what is it currently? So it's nothing super impressive, I'll tell you that. You see that big red brick building behind it? That is a U.S. courthouse, and they actually own the Dolly Madison house now, and it serves as judges' quarters. Judges can go in there to work, rest, hang out. It's just kind of their haven. The reason I know that is because about 5 months ago, there was a man on the tour who actually works in the courthouse. He does security there, and he said he was actually patrolling in the Dolly Madison house up there on the 3rd floor, and he said he was walking down the hallway, just patrolling, and he heard a door behind him slam closed. When he turned around to look at the door, he said he saw the light underneath go on. Well, obviously he works security, so he went to go check it out to see who was there and who's slamming these doors. He gets to the room, he opens the door, and nobody's in there. And he shared that story with us on the tour, again, about 5 months ago, and I told him I would tell everybody going forward, because that's a first-hand account of an experience in there. You can also see the lights turned off, so I don't know if someone's going home for work or if Dolly Madison is up there putting on a show for you all.
I saw a guy walking around.
The last fun fact before we move to the next one, this little sliver of street right here that's actually closed currently, that is called Madison Avenue because of the Dolly Madison house. So it's DC's version of the famous Madison Avenue. We're going to go just about 100 feet this way to our next stop, so just follow me along the sidewalk. I think you're my biggest tour this year so far. You hold that title. All right, so we made it to our 3rd stop on the tour, 3 out of 7, just so you know where we are in the whole thing. And the stop is actually the church behind me here. This is also part of the church, but this was added later. The oldest part of the church is right here. So this is St. John's Episcopal Church. It is the 2nd oldest structure on the park grounds here after the White House itself. The church is considered the unofficial church of the president. Obviously, because of the proximity to the White House, it's very easy for them to come over here and worship if they choose to do so. Every president since James Madison, except for Joe Biden, has worshiped in some capacity here. The reason Joe Biden hasn't made it over yet, I feel, is because it's been closed up until recently. Up until about 3 weeks ago, there was fencing still around this, much like the fencing around the park. And so it just recently came down, and I think the church just recently reopened to the public. Another fun fact about the church, every president since James Madison, except for Richard Nixon and now Joe Biden, worshipped here the morning of their inauguration. So typically, traditionally, you'll see the soon-to-be president worship at a yellow church. You usually see it televised. They walk out before they get into their cars and head down to the mall. This is that yellow church that they worship in before they become the next president of the United States. The bell up in the bell tower was cast by the Revere Company. You may recognize that last name. He was the son of Paul Revere, the famous Bostonian who warned of the British coming during the Revolutionary War. And it's still the bell that's up there that rings on a daily basis. The story I'm going to tell you with this church, inside the church there is a pew. It's pew 54. And it's the pew that's reserved for the president and the president's family if they choose to come over and worship. It's thought to be the same pew that every president has used since James Madison, so it's quite historical. And it's roped off for the president. Nobody else can sit in it. Well, whenever a former president passes away, which isn't super often, but when it does happen, they'll ring the bell up in the bell tower to commemorate that presidential passing. And it's said that at the stroke of midnight on that day, 6 ghostly figures appear in pew 54. They appear to be men in kind of like whitish looking clothes, but they're not super identifiable. So there are some theories about who these 6 figures could be. Some people think they're the first 6 presidents, basically welcoming in the next deceased president into the afterlife on the day that they pass. But again, because they're not identifiable, some people think there's 6 founding fathers who didn't get the same fame or notoriety as Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, but they're there for the same reason. They're welcoming, they're ushering in the next deceased president. But again, because they're not recognizable, some people think they're a group of Freemasons. You can really go down the rabbit hole about who these 6 figures are and why they're appearing the day that a president passes. Of the 7 stops on the tour, 2 of them are open to the public traditionally. This is one of those 2 stops that is usually open to the public. They just recently reopened, I think, so I'm a little unsure if it's like open doors like they used to be. You'd have to check that out. But it's one of the stops you can check out if you're into some personal investigating. If you can walk in, look for pew 54. You can't sit in it, it will be roped off, but you can take pictures of it to see if you get anything interesting in a photograph. And that is St. John's Episcopal Church here. So we're going to walk just to the corner here and go around. We'll actually get a nice view of the front of the church, but our next stop is going to be the hotel right across the street. So when you fill in here, you do get a nice view of the front of the church, but our next stop is actually right across the street here, the hotel across the street, so I'll start talking about that. That building, well, first off, you can see our famous DC cherry blossoms out front. So if you didn't get a chance to go down to the mall, that's what they look like. They're quite pretty this time of year. It's a great time to come to DC. That building, though, back there is the Hideouts Hotel. It is a very swanky hotel here in Washington, DC, very fancy. It opened back in 1928, and the reason it's called the Hideouts is because before the hotel was there used to be 2 Victorian mansions right on the corner. One belonged to John Hay, the other to Henry Adams. And so when they knocked down those mansions and built the hotel, they named it after those 2 fairly prominent families here in Washington, D.C. John Hay was the personal secretary to Abraham Lincoln, and Henry Adams was the grandson of John Quincy Adams and the great-grandson of John Adams. So he had presidential blood. The story I'm going to tell you involves Henry Adams. So he's the one that lived right here on the corner. One day, he's headed downtown that way to go to a dentist appointment. And as he's walking in the park here, he runs into a family friend who's actually headed back to his house to talk with his wife, who went by the nickname of Clover Adams. Well, being a gentleman, he escorts the family friend back to their house. They go up to the 2nd story where Clover's study was at the time. When they open the door, they find her lying there on the ground, unconscious, with an empty vial in her hand. Well, inside that vial was potassium cyanide, which back in the day was a chemical to help develop photographs. She was an amateur photographer here in Washington, D.C. But it's also a poison, and it's presumed that she drank it, fell to the ground, and died. Well, when people in town started hearing about this, they were a little suspicious. From the outside looking in, it looked like she had a pretty great life. She was married to the grandson of a president, lived in a big fancy house, good part of town, a lot of family money, all that kind of stuff. But you know, you never know what's going on with somebody on the inside. About a week later, though, her husband did something that turned a lot of suspicion right back onto him. He took all of her clothing and a lot of her personal artifacts, brought them into the park here and burned them publicly in a big, massive bonfire. When people in town, this guy goes by every night like a clockwork. He just drives around. He's raising the spirits for you, raising the spirits. But when people in town saw this and heard about this fire, they got even more suspicious. Why are you burning so much of her stuff so soon after her death? It looks like you're erasing her mark on your life. Why are you doing that? Well, nobody quite ever figured out. It was always ruled it was a suicide. He was never formally investigated or charged with anything. He was the grandson of a president living in Washington, D.C. Nobody had the guts to make an allegation like that against a man like him in a city like this. So he really just remained untouched. And we still to this day, people wonder what really happened with Clover Adams. Well, because she died right here in this corner, when they knocked down the house and built the hotel, it's thought that her spirit now haunts the Hay Adams. There is a particular time of year where there is a spike in strange things happening here. It corresponds to the first week in December, culminating in the first Sunday night in December, which happens to be the night that Clover allegedly took her own life. Two famous people have stayed in this hotel on that Sunday evening in December that had rather tragic things happen to them in their life. And so for that reason, it's thought to be a cursed night to stay here at the Hay Adams. Those two individuals, the first one, famous aviator Charles Lindbergh, stayed in this hotel on that Sunday evening. If you know anything about him, his young baby was abducted and ultimately murdered. It was quite the scandal back in the day, the Lindbergh baby. Also, another one, the second guest, another famous aviator, Amelia Earhart, stayed in this hotel on that Sunday evening. If you know anything about her, she got into that plane, flew into the Pacific, and just disappeared. So it's thought to be not the best night to come here to the Hay Adams. Like I said, of the 7 stops, 2 of them are open to the public. This is the second stop that is open to the public. It is a working, functioning hotel. You can walk right in. They do have I think they have a restaurant in there. I'm not sure if it's open. They also have a really nice roof deck up there. I'm not sure if it's open right now either. Well, it must be open.
That's why.
Yeah, there are people up there. It gives you a really nice view of all the stuff down that way. But I'm told if you do go in there for any reason, strike up a conversation with somebody who works there. I'm told they have some interesting stories being employees at the hotel, but also hearing things, collecting information and stories from people who have reported things in the hotel over the years. So it's definitely something to check out if you're into that personal investigation. We're going to cross the street right here to go in front of the White House. This is where you get your iconic DC photo. And the White House is our next move. Kind of fill in, I can get a nice view of the White House. I'll stand where it's blocked. But if you get towards the middle there, what you're looking at is a very iconic DC image. That is Andrew Jackson on his horse, silhouetted against the White House with the monument in the background. It's quite a nice photo if you want to make your way over there and snag one. You can put your phone up through this lens if you get a picture of it. But yeah, it's one of the more impressive shots in DC, I think. I've also found it a little funny that the park is named after Lafayette, but the central statue is of Andrew Jackson. You can actually see the statue of Lafayette, though, from mostly where we're standing. If you look off towards the Treasury building to kind of our right, like at a 45-degree angle right, you will see the outline of a statue in that corner. That is the statue of the Marquis de Lafayette, the namesake of the park. His statue's over there. But this stop obviously is the White House stop. So I'm going to start talking about the White House now. Some fun facts about it. Construction started in 1792. It finished in 1800, but that building you're currently looking at is not the original structure. That's because in 1814, during the War of 1812, the British came to town and burned it to the ground. So what you're looking at back there, more or less, is the reconstructed version from 1817. Obviously, it's undergone a lot of renovations and additions since then. If you're looking at the house, to the left is the east wing, to the right is the west wing. We can't really see them though. On the back side of the west wing is where the Oval Office is, that very iconic presidential office. The house itself is about 54,000 square feet. There are 132 rooms in there, and it is 6 levels. That's what the website says. 3 below and 3 above. So who really knows what's down there though? On to the ghosts now. So the first ghost I'm going to talk about is Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams, the second president. Another fun fact about the White House, every president except for George Washington has lived in some version of the White House here. The reason George Washington never lived here is because his presidency ended before the house was finished. So he never got the chance to move in. So John Adams, second president, first guy to move in, his wife Abigail, the first lady in the house, and the first honorary steward. And people think because of this title, she's stuck around all these years to look after the house, the grounds, and everybody inside the house. And she tends to pop up when weird or strange things happen. So 2 examples of this. The first one in 1974, a man hijacked a helicopter, flew it into the city, and actually landed on the White House lawn on the other side of the fence, which is obviously a big no-no. So Secret Service, they responded quickly, they apprehended the guy, whoops, and nothing bad happened from it. But later that day, when Secret Service was debriefing the situation, a lot of them reported seeing a strange older woman in various places around the grounds and inside the house itself. And that's also a big no-no at the White House, unaccounted people. They were very curious, who is this older woman you're seeing around the house and the grounds? Well, they eventually got to the point, they couldn't figure it out. They figured, might as well, let's look at some pictures and photographs, see if these guys might identify anybody. Well, sure enough, they got to a painting of Abigail Adams, and the guy said, that's who we saw. Fast forward, 20 years, similar incident. 1994, a man took a small airplane, like a 2-seater aircraft, flew it into the city, he hijacked it as well, flew it into the city, and crash landed on the White House lawn. So, and he died on impact. So not only is there a plane crash, there's also a fatality. The Secret Service respond, but also local EMTs here in Washington, D.C. report to the White House to help out with the fire and the crash in general. Well, again, same thing. Later that day, when they're kind of just talking about what happened, going over everything, the EMTs told Secret Service that when I'll wait till they pass. The EMTs told Secret Service that when they entered on the 17th Street side, which is where most people enter the White House, there was an older woman standing there pointing them where to go so they could get to the crash site as quickly as possible to help out. They were intrigued. Who is this woman? 20 years had passed. They ended up doing the same thing, same outcome. These guys independently identified Abigail Adams as the woman they saw there, pointing them where to go. So she seems to be fulfilling this reputation, somebody who's sticking around, popping up when these weird or strange things happen. The next ghost I'm going to talk about is considered the official ghost of the White House. Any guesses as to who it might be? I'll tell you, it's a president, one of the big ones. Not that, no. Say it again? Yeah, good old Abe Lincoln. He's considered our official ghost here. There's the famous Lincoln bedroom up there on the 2nd floor. A lot of strange things have happened in the Lincoln bedroom, reported by some pretty credible people who've lived in the White House over the years. Harry Truman was in there with his daughter. They kept hearing knocking on the bedroom and the bathroom door, but every time they'd open it, nothing would be there. Whenever Eleanor Roosevelt went in there with her small dog, the dog would frequently bark at one corner of the room. One of the more famous accounts comes from Winston Churchill. During World War II, Winston Churchill came here quite frequently to talk with FDR. And he said one evening in the middle of the night, he got up to go to the bathroom. And he said he was completely naked. And as he's walking to the bathroom, he said the ghost of Lincoln appeared right in front of him. And in true Churchill wit, he said he looked Lincoln right in the eyes and said, "Mr. Lincoln, I think you caught me at a disadvantage." He said Lincoln smiled and just disappeared into the air. So one of the more famous accounts coming from Churchill. Well, Lincoln is thought to have stuck around all these years to warn future presidents so they don't end up the same way that he did. 2 examples of this. The first one, John Kennedy, who we know in hindsight did suffer the same fate. 4 days before he was shot and killed, Jackie Kennedy reported waking up in their bedroom, and sitting on their dresser was a black top hat that very iconic Lincoln top hat. They had no idea where it came from. Nobody said that they had entered the president's bedroom while he was sleeping. They just woke up and there it was. The day before her husband was shot and killed, she noticed a Secret Service officer walking around with a unique looking gun. Turns out that gun was a 19th century Derringer, the same kind of gun that John Wilkes Booth used to murder Abraham Lincoln. And then that next day her husband was sadly shot and killed. The other example, which I think is a little eerier, involves Jimmy Carter. In 1979, Jimmy Carter was out in LA about to give a pretty public speech at the Civic Center. The morning of the speech, in his hotel room, he walks by a table and there's a newspaper open to an article about Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who shot JFK. And he got an eerie feeling about this because he was about to go give a very public speech. Well, when they get to the Civic Center, he tells Secret Service, go back out in the crowd, look for anything suspicious. Well, sure enough, they find a guy with a gun and a plan on shooting Jimmy Carter, and his name is Raymond Lee Harvey. So that real eerie connection back to Lee Harvey Oswald, who he saw that morning in the newspaper. And people think this is Abraham Lincoln. He's trying to drop these clues to warn these presidents if he feels they're in danger, so they don't end up the same way that he did. And so that's good old Abe Lincoln, the official ghost there at the White House. We just have 2 stops left. The last one you can see, or the next one you can see, and then the last one is the one that is obstructed. But as we walk back this way, I'll share some fun facts with you about the park and the area. So the park is currently closed, but if we were in there walking around, there's one thing you may notice, you definitely would notice if you had some garbage to throw away. There are no garbage cans in Lafayette Park. There's just none in there. Any guesses as to why? Someone said it, I think. Exactly, it's a security threat. They do not want any concealed space where someone could put something bad so close to the White House. There are actually no garbage cans in the whole perimeter around the White House. So even where we met for the tour to begin, there are no garbage cans. You have to cross the city street. You can find some on these street corners here, but you will not find any around the White House complex. Another question I get asked, a lot of these row homes along here, people ask if they're private residences. The answer is no, they used to be, but they no longer are. At one point they were going to be torn down, but we can thank good old Jackie Kennedy. She fought to get them on the National Historic Register, so they are currently protected and preserved. They're not going anywhere. Most of them now, it's just office space. There's nothing super fancy or impressive. There's a historical society in there. Dan Sickles, the man who murdered Key, actually used to live in one of the ones towards the middle here. Feel free to just fill in along here and then look back there. That's going to be our next stop, right across the street. So we made it to our 2 final stops. The next one that we can see, it's right on the corner there. And then the last one is the one we can't see, but I do have some photos to show you at the very end of that story. And then that'll be the end of the tour. So the next stop, this house right behind me here, this is called the Decatur House. It is one of the oldest standing homes here in Washington, D.C. It was built in 1818 for Stephen Decatur, the original owner. But the story I'm going to tell you first involves another man by the name of James Barron. And in 1808, James Barron was a Commodore in the U.S. Navy. And he was out on his ship sailing in the Chesapeake when a British ship sailed up, forced their way onto his boat. They were looking for British defectors at the time. Well, they ended up finding 4 of them. They hanged one of them on the spot they hanged one of them and then they tortured the other 3 before they sailed away. Well, when the U.S. Navy found out about this, they were not too happy with James Barron. They thought he could have put up more of a fight to keep the British off of his ship. And so he gets court-martialed and he ends up going to trial. Well, that is where Stephen Decatur comes into the picture. When James Barron goes to trial, Stephen Decatur sits on his jury. Well, they end up finding him guilty. They strip him of service for 5 years, which really angered James Barron. Well, let's fast forward to 1820. That's now 12 years after that whole ship incident. About 2 years since they built this house. James Barron finds himself here in Washington, D.C., And he finds out Stephen Decatur's living in this house on the corner here, and he remembers 12 years ago when Decatur convicted him in a trial. So what he does, he walks up to the front door there and he knocks on it. When Decatur comes down, he challenges him to a duel. Well, being a gentleman in 1820, he accepts. He goes and gets his gun. The two men head into the park here where they have their duel. This is where James Barron shoots Stephen Decatur pretty severely in the abdomen. And so they end up bringing him back to his house. They take him up to the 3rd floor where his bedroom was at the time. They call the doctor. The doctor comes and tries to stitch up the gunshot wound 3 separate times. Each time, though, it rips back open. It's too big of a flesh wound to stay closed. Meanwhile, his wife is at home, fairly hysterical about everything that's happening for good reason. Reported that she went and got every bed sheet, tablecloth, piece of linen she could find to help stop the bleeding, but also change the sheets he was on so he wasn't constantly in a pool of his own blood. Unfortunately, though, Decatur does pass away. He basically drifts off into unconsciousness from blood loss and ends up passing away. Before he goes, though, he's quoted as saying, "I have never felt such pain as this. Allegedly, a gunshot wound in your abdomen is an awful way to go." And so he does pass away up there on the 3rd floor. After he passes, reports of his ghost start popping up pretty soon after. People say they see him in these top windows, mainly not the side ones, but the front 3. The one right in the middle, when the tour's over, you can walk back over and see those top windows. I'm going to tell you about something in a second. But those top windows, people will see his figure usually standing there, and people say he's gazing down. He's looking down at the sidewalk almost. The other place people see his spirit is in the foyer of the house. The front door, you go in the front door, there's a foyer that goes right to the back door. People say they see his spirit around that back door, and it looks like there's something in his hand. People wonder, think, speculate, maybe he's trying to get back out to the park here with his gun to try to redo that duel that ended in his untimely death right here in the park grounds and then up there on the 3rd floor of his house. Currently, if we were standing on the front side where that tent is, you would see a sign out front of the Decatur House that says the National Center for White House History. There is a small museum in there. There's also a gift shop. You can see it kind of lit up over there. But if you go to the website for the Decatur House, you'll see a very happy couple getting married in the courtyard behind this building right here. It is a party venue space. You can rent it out for your wedding, your birthday party, a work function. It's actually quite popular when it's not a pandemic. It's all lit up. There are people in there all dressed up, walking around and whatnot. I'm not sure if they advertised about the man who died up there on the 3rd floor, but it did happen all those years ago. The one thing that people report that spend too much time inside the Decatur House is abdomen pain. And they tie that back to the way Decatur died all those years ago up there on the 3rd floor. Reports have really been across the spectrum. Some people leaving the Decatur House with just some discomfort in their abdomen, but there have been reports of people leaving here with actual internal bleeding from spending too much time inside the house. The idea is the longer you're in the house, the more likely you could succumb to what some people call the curse of Stephen Decatur, where he wants you to feel the pain he felt all those years ago when he died up there on the 3rd floor. So definitely one of the eerier stops. And this is also one of the stops. I have another guest story to share with you. So this was probably about a year ago at this point. There was a man on a tour. It wasn't my tour, but he took the tour and he took a bunch of pictures all over the park and then went home and looked through the photos. And he ended up getting a picture. If you look at the front of the house, you can go back at the end of the tour and look at the top right window. And he got a photo of a figure standing in that window. And so what he did, he was so intrigued by this that he signed up the next night for the tour. And that was the night I was given the tour. And so he came on the tour, we got here, he pulled out his camera, he told the story, and he showed everybody on the tour, including me, the photo. And it was quite a compelling photo. There is the figure of a man. It's somewhat faint, but there is a figure of a man in that upper right window there. So definitely something to check out. At the end of the tour, you can walk over there, take some photos, see if you get anything, something like that. The final stop of the tour is the one that we cannot see. The Blair House, if we were to walk there, we would just go right down this little block here and swing around the corner, and you'd see it there. But the park's closed, so we can't walk over there. The Blair House, though, currently is the official guest residence of any foreign dignitary that's invited by the president to come to America.
Is it in the northeast?
Say it again?
Blair House.
The Blair House, yeah, what about it?
Is it in the northeast?
It's in northwest. Yeah. They don't have to stay there if they don't want to, but they can if the option's available to them. The house itself was built in 1824 for the Surgeon General. It was purchased in 1836 by its namesake. The guy's name was Francis Preston Blair. And Blair himself did not have the best reputation. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But he owned a newspaper here in Washington, D.C. called The Globe. And it was more or less a political propaganda paper for his very good friend at the time, the president, Andrew Jackson. Well, rumors start spreading about Blair and about Blair's house, right around the corner there. People said that they frequently saw young kids, young girls going inside the house, but never coming back out of the house. And so there was a journalist at the Globe who wanted to look into this, to see if there was any truth to these allegations. Because one, he was a journalist, but two, this was his boss, the man he was working for. Didn't turn out so well for him though. About 5 days into his investigation, he turns up dead, but also dismembered. They found the guy's head in the state of New York, his arms and torso were in Connecticut, and his legs made it all the way down to Pennsylvania. To this day, the crime is considered unsolved. It's probably going to remain unsolved. But people wonder and speculate if Blair had something to do with it. He caught wind that one of his employees was looking into some rumor about him and his house. He wanted to make it go away, put out a hit, had him killed. We don't really know though, it's just a theory. Blair, much like Henry Adams, grandson of a president, Blair was best friends with the president. Nobody wanted to make any sort of allegation that could get him in trouble. He was considered a member of Jackson's kitchen cabinet. He wasn't an official cabinet member, but he was so close to the president that he had the president's ear whenever he wanted to talk with him. Two of the more famous ghosts, though, that are thought to haunt the Blair House involve Harry Truman. In 1950, Harry Truman was living there while the White House was being renovated, and there were two men. They were Puerto Rican nationalists. Their names were Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola. And they were upset with Harry Truman because they wanted Puerto Rico to remain an independent country. So what they did, they knew the time of day that Truman would pull up on Pennsylvania Avenue and walk into the guest house there. And so they hung out on 17th Street, which is that street right over there, but down a block on Pennsylvania Avenue. When Truman gets out of the car, they come running down the sidewalk. They pull out their guns and they start firing on the president, trying to assassinate him. Secret Service responds pretty quickly. They start firing back. They get into a shootout. Oscar Collazo ends up getting hit. He falls right in front of the steps, the main steps that lead up into the Blair House, and dies there. One of the Secret Service officers also got hit. He falls to the ground a little bit to the right, kind of in the bushes. Because those two figures die right in front of the Blair House, they're thought to now haunt the house itself. A lot of famous people have stayed in the Blair House over the years. People like Queen Elizabeth II, Putin has stayed there. Really, any foreign dignitary that's been around long enough has spent some time inside the Blair House there. And a lot of them report strange things happening. Sort of your stereotypical hauntings, hearing footsteps, doors opening and closing, that sort of thing. But also a hazy memory from their time inside the house and slight nausea during their stay in the Blair House. Because these two men died right in front of the house, and it happened in 1950, we had cameras, and so people took pictures of their dead bodies, which I'm not going to show you. So if
Now the girl's got attention.
Oh, we did 90s?
if the park was open, we could go stand right where one of the dead bodies is. I actually have some people recreate it. I'll start over here and fan my way this way, and I'll tell you along the way. So in my left hand here, this is Oscar Collazo. He's the one that tried to assassinate Harry Truman. That you can stand right where his dead body is if the park is open. In my other hand, this is the secret. This is the Secret Service officer that was hit and died in the shootout as well. There is a plaque commemorating the Secret Service officer. There's no plaque for Oscar. And then Griselio was arrested and went to jail for trying to assassinate the president. I will tell you, pre-pandemic, we used to give out, you could rent EMF detectors. EMF detectors they detect electromagnetic frequencies, which are thought to be the frequency of the paranormal. The most consistent place that we have them go off is where Griselio's dead body is. It's the most consistent place. The sidewalk in front of the Blair House is where they most often go off. And so they're thought to be the most famous ghost there at the Blair House. So if you come back to DC and the park is open, go stand in front, right where the front steps are. You'll see it pretty easily where his dead body was. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the tour. So I hope you enjoyed it, learned something interesting about a person or a place. Thank you. They don't always clap, so I appreciate it. If you have any questions, stick around, even if they're directional, because that's usually what people want to ask. Otherwise, get home safely, enjoy the rest of your time in DC, and have a wonderful night.
Yes.
Yes.
Off the top.
Finished the ghost tour, took some photographs, and headed back to the hotel. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. That's okay. The baby goes 11 miles an hour.